Pollution from fossil fuels has been increasing the levels of carbon dioxide across the world for decades. Now, the last place on Earth that had remained under an historic threshold has reached 400 parts per million. The amount of carbon dioxide in the Antarctic atmosphere reached the milestone on 23 May, the high level recorded in human history. Daily average carbon dioxide levels at the South Pole rose to a new high level of 400 parts per million for the first time in 4 million years, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The increase of carbon dioxide is everywhere, even as far away as you can get from civilization, said Dr. Peter Tans, the lead scientist of NOAA's Global Greenhouse Gas Reference Network. If you emit carbon dioxide in New York, some fraction of it will be in the South Pole next year. The far southern hemisphere was the last place on Earth where CO2 had not yet reached this mark, said Dr. Tans. Global CO2 levels will not return to values below 400 parts per million in our lifetimes, and almost certainly for much longer. Since the start of monitoring in the 1950s, the South Pole has shown the same, relentless upward trend as the rest of the world. But its remote location means it is the last to register the impacts of increasing emissions from fossil fuels. We know from abundant and solid evidence that the CO2 increase is caused entirely by human activities, Dr. Tans said. Since emissions from fossil fuel burning have been at a record high during the last several years, the rate of CO2 increase has also been at a record high. And we know some of it will remain in the atmosphere for thousands of years. Over the course of the year, carbon dioxide levels rise during autumn and winter and decline during the northern hemisphere's summer, when terrestrial plants consume CO2 during photosynthesis. But the plants only capture a fraction of annual emissions. For every year since observations began in 1958, there has been more CO2 in the atmosphere than the year before. Last year's global carbon dioxide average reached 399 parts per million, meaning that the global average in 2016 will almost certainly surpass 400 parts per million. The only question is whether the lowest month for 2016 will also remain above 400. The average levels are not only increasing, but the trend also seems to be accelerating. The annual growth rate of atmospheric carbon dioxide measured at NOAA's Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii jumped 3.05 parts per million during 2015, the largest year-to-year increase in 56 years of monitoring. For the first time on record, atmospheric carbon dioxide is expected to surpass 400 parts per million for the entire year due to an extra boost from El Niño, the cyclical Pacific Ocean warming that produces extreme weather across the globe, causing terrestrial ecosystems to lose stored CO2 through wildfire, drought and heat waves. Scientists say 2016 has seen the fastest annual increase in CO2 levels observed to date, and they will likely remain above this point for at least a human lifetime. Last year was the fourth consecutive year that CO2 grew more than 2 parts per million, which set another record. This year looks set to be the fifth, according to the NOAA.